In the heart of Dublin, amidst the narrow streets and fading lights, lives Eveline, a young woman caught between the weight of her past and the promise of a new beginning. For 19 years, she has carried the burden of family duties, the echoes of her mother's final wish, and the uncertain hopes of love and escape. Her story is one of quiet struggle, of fear and courage intertwined, and of a choice that will shape the course of her life forever. As the evening falls, Eveline faces a moment that many dream of but few find: the chance to leave behind the familiar and step into the unknown. Will she find the strength to break free, or will the ties that bind her prove too strong? The light was fading. Eveline sat motionless by the front window, the heavy curtains brushing against her shoulder. She could smell the dust in the fabric, dry and faintly musty. A smell that had been there for years, part of the house itself. Her gaze drifted over the street outside. The avenue stretched quietly before her, lit by the pale gold of the setting sun. She had known every stone, every lamppost since childhood. There was the corner where the Devines had lived before they moved away. There, too, was the house where little Keo once kept watch for policemen during their games. So much had changed. Some neighbors had died, others had moved to better houses, and new faces, strangers, now occupied the doorways. The children's shouts and laughter that had once filled the street seemed far away, like echoes from another lifetime. Inside, the clock ticked steadily on the mantel, a sound as familiar as her own heartbeat. Eveline shifted slightly, her thoughts turning to her family. Her father, stern and often quick to anger, still lived here. She remembered the years when she was younger, when his temper seemed less sharp, when he would read them ghost stories by the fire. Her brothers were no longer at home. Harry was away, working in the church's decorations, and Ernest was gone now. She thought of her mother, of the way her health had failed, and of that terrible promise she had made at her bedside, to keep the home together as long as possible. That promise had kept her here, year after year, through arguments, through the long hours working at the stores, through her father's complaints about her wages. But things were different now. There was Frank. Frank was tall and broad-shouldered, with an open, cheerful face. He worked on ships and had stories of countries Eveline could barely imagine, far-off coasts, bustling ports, warm sunsets on the deck of a ship. He had taken her to see the Bohemian Girl at the theater, and afterwards they had walked along the streets while he spoke of Buenos Aires, where he had friends and where a new life could be waiting for them. When she was with him, she felt lighter. He laughed often, treated her gently, spoke of their future as though it were certain. With him, she would be respected, cared for, not just another tired face behind a counter. Still, leaving was not simple. Her father could be cruel, but there had been moments, small, tender moments, that pulled at her heart, like the time he made her tea when she was ill, or the nights when, before the bitterness had set in, he told her ghost stories by lamplight. The promise to her mother weighed on her. She remembered the dim, airless room, the faint smell of sickness, her mother's lips forming the words, "Keep the home together." Eveline had watched her mother fade into silence, her life a long endurance. Was she about to break that promise? Was she running toward happiness or away from duty? And what if Frank turned out to be different once they were far from Dublin? What if the unknown was worse than what she already had? The night air was thick with the smell of the sea, sharp and salty. The great ship loomed at the quay, lights glowing against the dark water. The steady thrum of the engines sent a shiver through Eveline's chest. They were at the gangway now. Frank stepped ahead, turning back to her. The ship's horn sounded, deep and final. Eveline's hands gripped the cold iron railing of the pier, the metal bit into her palms. Something inside her refused to move, a tight, choking fear that no amount of longing could push aside. Frank called to her again. "Eveline, Come on! She met his eyes, but hers were blank, wide, almost pleading for him to understand. She could not speak. She could not move. She felt herself anchored to the stone beneath her feet, the past holding her as tightly as chains. The crowd pressed forward, and Frank was carried onto the ship. The gangway lifted. The vessel began to pull away, slow and heavy, into the open water. Eveline stood on the pier, the wind pulling at her hair. She stayed there long after the ship's lights had faded, her decision or her surrender sealing her fate. Crowds moved along the platform, their voices blending with the creak of ropes and the splash of the tide. Frank stood beside her, his voice low but urgent. "Come on, Eveline," he said, his hand brushing hers. "It's time." Her heart beat fast. This was the moment she had imagined so many times, stepping onto the ship, leaving the gray streets of Dublin behind, beginning something new. The ship was gone. The last echo of its horn faded into the night, leaving only the lap of water against the quay. Eveline stood frozen, her fingers still curled as if holding on to something that was no longer there. She turned slowly toward the streets of Dublin. The familiar outlines of buildings and the dim glow of the street lamps greeted her like old companions, unchanged, unyielding. Each step back home felt heavier, as if she were walking deeper into the life she had just refused to escape. In the days that followed, Frank's absence was like a hollow space inside her. She said nothing to her father, nothing to the neighbors. Routine settled over her again, the same dust on the curtains, the same shop counter, the same ticking clock. But somewhere inside, a quiet ache reminded her of the ship that had sailed, and of the moment when freedom was within her grasp and she had let it go.